רואים את הכפתור? כולם רואים כפתור של ה-CC? יפה. אז עכשיו תלחצו עליו, ויעל תכתוב כמה מילים. כשאתם לוחצים עליו יש show subtitles, ואז אתם תראו את המילים של יעל. אוקיי. מעולה. יש לנו עוד 3 דקות. We have another 3 minutes, so everybody can breathe, take a breather. Okay.
Everybody can have a last look at their phones and then switch them off. Good idea, Laura. I'm going to switch off my phone.
מי שרוצה להגדיל את הטקסט שלו, גם באותו מקום, ב-Live Transcript, לוחצים, Subtitles, Settings, ואתם יכולים להגדיל את הפונט, לשנות את הצבע, כל אחד, זה בשליטה עצמאית שלו. תכף כשאני אתחיל, אנחנו גם נדבר עליו קצת, ניתן איזשהו רקע, ולוגיסטיקות.
Okay, Mickey, are you ready? Let's get started.
כן, אנחנו תכף נתחיל, אז השעה בדיוק 8. 8 o'clock, so I'm starting, Richard. I would say a few words in Hebrew, give them some logistics, what to do, and then we'll start from there. Is that okay with you?
Okay. As long as you say when to start.
We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
I can.
Is it only it's just me I can't hear?
I'm sorry?
I can hear you. Can everybody else hear
I
Rich?
lost my volume.
Well, apparently it's not me.
It's me. Sorry. Too many buttons, too many screens.
Welcome to the wonderful world of Zoom.
אוקיי, טוב אנשים, אז we starting. אז חברים ככה, לוגיסטיקות, בקשה לנו אליכם, השם לשים אותו באנגלית, להשאיר את המסך דלוק, 2 כפתורים חשובים, מיוט, שהוא הראשון, למרות שאתם תהיו על פי רוב במיוט, אבל כן לשלוט עליו, ווידאו. אם אתם לוקחים, אתם בטלפון ואתם הולכים לטייל בחדר, אנא כבו את המסך, כבר היו לנו מצבים שאנשים נכנסו לשירותים עם הוידאו דלוק, מאוד לא נעים. ואני לא רואה את כולם, אז אני לא אספיק לכבות את כולם. אז אנא מכם, תדאגו לזה. דבר שני, יש קבוצת הוואטסאפ, כולכם בקבוצת הוואטסאפ, שם אפשר לשאול את כל השאלות, אם לכם שאלות לבאנדלר, שאלות רק על הנושא של היום, אם אפשר באנגלית, עדיף, אתם תקלו עלינו את העבודה, עם השם שלכם, תרשמו את השם, ואז את השאלה, ככה שנוכל לפנות אליכם, במידה והשאלה תתאים, נוכל לפנות אליכם, ואתם תשאלו את ריצ'ארד. הווידאו מוקלט, יש תרגום, התרגום הולך להעביר את רוח הדברים. התרגום הוא תרגום כתוב, סימולטני, והוא יעביר את רוח הדברים. לא הבנתם משהו, תשאלו בקבוצת הוואטסאפ, יש מלא חבר'ה שם, כולם מבינים, יעזרו, יענו, יביאו תשובות, אחלה אנשים כולם. And we're starting. So, in order for us to start, I'm excited. So, good evening. This is, I got this from Dr. Imbar Cohen, the chairman of the Israeli NLP Association, and she couldn't be here, so she wrote this, so I'm reading this to everybody. As good evening to the Israeli NLP community. Good evening, Dr. Bandler, and good evening, Laura Spicer. First of all, I would like to open with an apology that I'm not talking now in person. This is a very special and exciting event, and my heart is with you all, but I'm bound to attend an important family event. That is why I'm sending this in writing. Dr. Bandler, what a privilege we have that you were able to, that we were able to coordinate this masterclass with you and have the opportunity for us to enjoy and learn about the frontline of NLP, to see a true master of the art in his artistry, and to connect to your doings and insights. This is a big honor for us, as the NLP is an evolving field, and a part of being a professional is keeping ourselves up to date. Dr. Bandler, thank you for agreeing to come and give us this masterclass. I would like to thank from the bottom of my heart to Laura Spicer and Mickey Barkan for their hard work to bring this amazing masterclass to Israel. The work behind the scenes was great and deserves a lot of appreciation. This masterclass is a part of our will to continue and provide the Israeli NLP community some of what is happening in the international NLP field, bringing masterclasses, translating them, watching in Zoom. All of this is made possible for us by being together and by connecting the resources of all of us together. This is the power of community, and this is the power of working together. We continue to brew more things for the community and hope that more and more NLPers will join us so we can continue doing this great work. Wishing you all the very fruitful evening, Dr. Imbar Cohen. I will say a few words in Hebrew, how I got into this. אני פגשתי את לאורה בפייסבוק, ולאורה ספייסר יש לה קבוצה של practice group, אחת הקבוצות הראשונות והגדולות בעולם של practice group אונליין, the number one practice group, תחפשו אותה בפייסבוק או תדבר על זה, וראיתי שהיא עושה כיתת אומן עם דוקטור ריצ'רד באנדלר, ואמרתי וואו, אני חייב להיות שם. היות ואני יודע ואני מכיר את הקסם של הבן אדם הזה, כנציג שלו מזה 20 שנה, היה לי את הזכות ללמוד איתו ב-96 NLP, ומאז אני כל הזמן לומד איתו, וזו הזדמנות מדהימה מדהימה, וכשהצלחתי לעזור לה, פניתי אליה, ודרכה הצלחנו להביא את האירוע המדהים הזה לכאן לישראל, ואני כאילו מתייבש לי הפה מההתרגשות, אז אני אסתום. Laura, I was just saying that I'm so excited, my mouth is cotton mouth, so I will shut up and I will move this to you, Laura, because you're, well, you know, I can say, there's not enough words I can say about you and Richard, but I will let you do the talking and I'll put myself aside and go drink something. So, Laura, take it.
Okay, well, I'm also not going to do a lot of talking, because what we're here for tonight is to listen to Richard. And I'm just interested, how many of you have already trained with Richard? Can you show me people who have already learned from Richard? How many people here have already worked with Richard? Wow. Okay, so this is a first experience for so many people. So what I would say is shut up on the inside, open up all your senses, put your pens and paper down, pay attention to this man who is going to entertain and teach you this evening in a way that you probably haven't experienced before. So open up those senses, get your brains ready, and just sit back and enjoy the ride. Because this is my good friend, my special mentor, the co-creator of NLP, a genius. We are so lucky, people. And I am so emotional, actually, to be part of bringing this to Israel, which is very close to my heart. Thank you for taking care of Israel, for all of us across the planet. I'm very grateful for that. And I am so excited to put Israel and Dr. Richard Bandler together. And that's enough. It's time to welcome with a silent Zoom applause, Dr. Richard Bandler. Way! Over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. And thank you, Michael, Mickey. I thought I'd start out today, since so many of you appear to be not people who've been in a seminar with me, giving you a brief history. It was over 50 years ago that I met John Grinder. And at the time, I was trying to figure out the difference between what a psychotherapist did when it did something and what the rest of the time was, which was most of it. I had met Virginia Satir, somebody named Fritz Perls, and a few other psychotherapists and psychiatrists. And every once in a while, they would get a result, but most of the time, they were completely inconsistent about it. The models that I was using at the time to try and understand what they were doing are models like predicate calculus and symbolic logic and the same way you encode things in computer, Fortran and BASIC. And I wasn't really making a lot of headway. I could recapitulate what the therapist did when it worked, but I really couldn't build a model of it that I could use, because a true model allows you to take success and compute where other success should be. And that's what the whole notion of a calculus is. So when I started out and met John Grinder, he had studied with Noam Chomsky, who had built a model of how language works intuitively. That when you're a native speaker of language, you understand without any grammar training whether a sentence is well-formed or not. In English, if you say, me, you, trees, follow wind, everybody knows whether they've had a grammar lesson or not. It's just not a well-formed sentence of their language. Whereas if you say things like colorless green ideas sleep furiously, you know it's not well-formed, but you know it's more well-formed than the first one. Our ability to have a neurology which is capable of generating systematic intuitions is what we were wanted to study in how people in the field of psychotherapy, communication, hypnosis, sales, all kinds of things. So if we could build a model of the difference between when things worked and when they didn't. We tried that initially by modeling experts. And John Grinder was a brilliant syntactician. We worked together for 10 years. We wrote 6, 7, 8 books together. We were very productive, but it just didn't really cut it for me. You have to excuse me, I have a little cough from having had COVID. Anyway, what happened is over the years as they went by, I noticed that I could learn more from my clients than I could from studying professionals. So I kind of veered to one side. There was a point at which I had basically 3 clients that just stuck out in my mind. Because when we started first talking about how people think visually and they think auditorily and kinesthetically, the initial instinct of most people was to use this for diagnosis. People would walk up to me and say, I'm a visual. And the truth is, everybody has at least 3 strings to their bow. Everybody uses all your representational systems, but that's not enough information to know how to change somebody. It's enough information to be able to talk to them better, but it's not enough information to know, and it's not a diagnosis, it's an observation. And those are two different things. As soon as you start putting judgments on what you see and hear, you start seeing and hearing less over and over and over again. This is what I noticed about psychologists, that they would tell me things like, when people look away, they're avoiding something. And the truth is, when you ask somebody a question and their eyes go up, they're just accessing information to remember. They're not avoiding anything. They're actually trying to answer your question. But when you put a value judgment on things, I had gone in college to something called an NTL training. They required everybody in the college to do that. And that was from Harvard's National Training Lab. And when I walked in, I sat down, I crossed my legs and I crossed my arms, mostly because I had been riding a motorcycle on the way there and I was cold. And the trainer turned and looked at me and said, "You're closed to new ideas." And I never really thought of myself as being terribly closed to new ideas, especially at the age of 18. And I turned around and I looked at him and I said, "Whatever are you talking about?" And he said, "Your arms and legs are crossed." And I said, "Well, that's not where ideas go in, just to start with. And the fact that I cross my arms doesn't necessarily mean I'm not open to new ideas." And he said, "Well, according to Neo-Freudian theory," and I went, "Oops, here we go." This is the point at which psychologists begin to hallucinate. They begin to defend their theories more than they pay attention to their senses. And I don't care what field you're in, when your theory is more important than your experience, you're going to end up doing stupid things. That's all that happens. When I started out, there were 160 some odd schools of psychotherapy, all claiming they had the right approach, when not one single one of them could systematically solve a problem consistently. People came in with a phobia, they would go out with a phobia. After 3 or 4 years, they'd probably go out with 5 or 6 phobias instead of just one, because all of psychology had focused on looking for what caused problems, not what solves problems. Actually, the first book I wrote with John Grinder is called The Structure of Magic, and it's a book about language and therapy. The copyright has long run out on that book. I renewed the copyright, but right now I'm rewriting the book so that it's going to be a book about problem solving. Because really, we didn't realize it at the time, but the initial meta model that John Grinder and I came up with, which produced almost everything else, was a book about problem solving, so that it taught you to think more than you remember. Remembering is good to recall things that already work, but when you're recalling things that don't work, it can cause problems. The brain is designed to make things ever so familiar. And so that when you see a new chair, you don't have to figure out what it is. You see a new doorknob, you have several choices about how to open it, and you can go in and out without it being a brand new experience. That part is good. But when bad things happen, or silly things happen, or random things happen, psychologists would say it causes you to have a problem. I would say what you do is learn, and you overlearn. And so that a lot of the clients that came to me, because I only took clients that had been given up on by other people. And people said, originally they said, "Why do you take such hard cases?" And I said, "Well, I'm not taking hard cases. I'm going for the interesting things," because I would get a case history, which is a list of all the things that haven't worked. Basically, all I had to do is come up with something else. And the answers weren't in the case history. They weren't in the history of the person. A lot of people knew exactly where their problems came from. They would tell me, I had horrible parents, and they taught me, to distrust, men, or to be afraid of people, or I fell in a river and now I'm terrified of water. They know where their problems came from. The notion in psychology is if you understood your problems, presto bango, miraculously, understanding would produce change. And it's a lovely idea. We tried it for 100 years and it just doesn't work. And it didn't work then, and it doesn't work as well now. So what I started doing is listening to clients when they came in a little bit more intently. And it started for me really when I went to Houston once. I got a call from my office and they said, there's a guy down there that wants to see you privately. And I said, well, was he referred by a psychiatrist? And they went, no, he's just wealthy. And I said, okay, that's a good foundation for a start. And I went and saw him in a hotel room, and he came in and told me he was an opera singer. And that when he performed, he was completely motivated, but when it was time to practice, he just couldn't get himself to do it. He said, my motivation disappears. Now, while he was talking to me, I asked some simple questions. I said, okay, when you feel really motivated, where does it start? And he literally reached down, I can't do it on the screen, but he reached down to his diaphragm, to his belly, and made this gesture. He said, it just comes up and keeps pouring through me. And he said, and I could sing for 1,000 hours on stage. He said, but when I practice, and he made the reverse gesture. And that's when I started becoming more detailed. It's not a question of what you're feeling, and it's not a question of why you're feeling it. It was a question of the direction in which it moved. And I found out that the direction in which feelings move is a direct result of what they're thinking. And if you change the way you think, it changes the way you feel, and therefore it changes what you're capable of doing. And this became something that built the foundation of NLP over the course of the last 50 years. And the few clients that said things to me that really stuck in my mind. So I took this guy and I had him start with his feelings and spin them the way they spin when he was motivated and start thinking about the things he needed to practice. And he looked at me and he said, I feel motivated. And I said, well, isn't that what you asked for? And he said, well, but will it work when I leave here? And I said, if you think differently, you'll feel differently. If you go back to your house and look at the sheet music and spin the feelings backwards, you're going to feel that a struggle. You're going to feel hesitation. And then I asked him, I said, because I noticed he was a big guy. He was an opera singer. Good opera singers tend to be big. But he was a little bigger than he should have been. And I said, is there anything that crosses your mind that maybe you should hesitate to do? And he said, eat sweets. And I said, yeah. And he said, if I start eating a cake, I'll eat the whole thing. And I said to him, let's think about it this way. If you took that feeling that hesitates when you think about practicing, I said, and spin it like this, and then make a picture of the cake that you would eat. Do you like eating it? And he went, no. That's my definition of self-control, when you think on purpose. Now, my last book, which, by the way, is number 33, the title of the book is called Thinking on Purpose. And all of my books have a theme to them. At the time, I'm trying to accomplish something. Some of them have similar techniques in them, but the purpose of the book is different. When I wrote Get the Life You Wanted, there were a lot of people that had problems that they were going to therapists and they weren't getting solved. So I was in my kitchen, I saw a cookbook, and I opened the cookbook and I noticed it had chocolate cakes and it had this kind of cake. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could break problems down into, the difference between pastry, meat, and vegetables. And for me, that broke down into getting over things, getting through things, and getting to things, which are what most of the problems over the years that people had brought me. They either couldn't get to something, or they couldn't get over something, or they just couldn't get through something that was difficult, like getting over alcohol or getting over addictions to drugs. There's some things you just have to go through a lot of stuff. It always surprises me when people tell me and they go, I was on a diet. And then one night I just couldn't stand it anymore. I ate a bag of potato chips and I went, that's it. I broke my diet. It's over. And especially when they tell me they had already lost 20 pounds. And I said, I always ask people, I go, why didn't you go back on it after the potato chips? If you could do 20 days on and 1 day off, that's not so bad. And they go, well, the diet was broken. After that, I just couldn't do it anymore. So I got a new diet. And, when I get a flat tire in my car, I don't buy a new car, I fix the tire. And once you put air back in the tire and patch the tire, you can drive the same tire, and the car will go as many places as it went before the flat tire. Most people don't think about their brain that way. If you're doing something that works and then you stop doing it, you should go back to the thing that works. If your plan is to never make a dieting mistake again, or worse than that, it amazes me. People go on diets and are surprised they're hungry. And, you know, there's no rocket science to losing weight. You exercise more and eat less. And when you exercise more and eat less, the end result is you will feel hungry. And when you feel hungry, you should be going, wow, I'm doing exactly the right thing. This was the hardest thing to convince drug addicts of, that when you go through withdrawal, it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. The more withdrawal you go through, the closer you are to being free of being dependent on a substance like heroin, crack, and now fentanyl people are taking. And that's dangerous because fentanyl in the smallest doses can kill you. You know, they used to call it dangerous drugs when you smoke pot, but fentanyl, you could take one pill and die. It's a terrible, terrible thing that we're passing this out to our children in this country, at least. And to me, you know, that governments have to get the idea that that controlling these things isn't just getting the drug dealers. We have to teach our young people to think on purpose so that they can get control of their feelings. So rather than trying to drug them out of depression, we need to teach them to be happy. And with all the clients I've had over the 50 years that have been given up on by psychiatrists and everybody else, it always boiled down to something simpler than you could imagine. Because, you know, if they came in and they were torn with anxiety, the first thing I would say to myself is, well, it seems like they don't know how to relax. And instead of give them pills to relax, I would use altered states of some kind. Sometimes I would teach them to meditate intensely. Sometimes I would use various types of relaxation things. I know in Israel, we don't use the word hypnosis, but it really is just a word. To me, there are thousands of altered states, and whether you call them hypnotic, meditative, or prayer, everybody who meditates and concentrates is going to alter their state of mind. To me, I really use the word concentration more than the word hypnosis, because to me, with full concentration, you can alter your brainwave patterns. And if somebody teaches you how to do it right, you can learn to relax, no matter how much anxiety. Once you teach somebody to relax, you have to teach them how to relax at just the right moments. Now, the opera singer taught me a lot. The other client that taught me a lot was I had one that came in who was jumping out of their skin. She was coming in and she was gone. She goes, I'm so upset, you know, I'm furious. I don't know and what to do. And I looked at her and I said, well, how do you know to be upset? And she said, well, I think and took her hands like this and went, I think I've blown everything out of proportion. And I didn't even ask her what things. I just said, try shrinking it down. And she looked at me and she goes, what? And I said, well, is it life size, whatever it is you're looking at in your head, or is it larger than life? And she went, oh, it's at least 2 or 3 times larger than life. And I said, so people's heads are this big? And she went, yep. And I said, and she said, and I can see how upset people are at me. And I said, well, shrink their heads down so they're only this big. And she goes, and she looked at me and she goes, well, how do you do that? And I said, well, you put a border around the picture, you shrink it down so it's a little tiny picture. This is before cell phones. Now it's easy. I tell people, make it only as big as the picture on a cell phone, maybe half a cell phone size. And I go, now, when you look at it now, do you feel so upset? The phrase blown out of proportion, which is an idiom in English, I don't know if it is in Hebrew, but the idea that pictures get too big and you feel the bigger the picture, the worse you feel. Theaters have known about this for years. That's why they have gigantic screens and IMAX. That you go to the theater here, there are little screens for some movies and big screens for action movies because you can get very involved. The first big screen movie I went to see was called The Exorcist. And it was amazing to me how much it terrified people in the audience. I personally found it humorous, and every time I would laugh, everybody in the audience would look at me like I was insane. But I just found the idea of being terrified of the devil to be not that frightening. To me, the devil that you have to worry about is not so much the one that's going to come from below the earth and curse you with a pitchfork. The one you have to worry about is the one inside your head doing things to you without you having control over it. The chains of free people are primarily ideas. The third client that built the foundation of what's now currently called NLP was somebody with post-traumatic stress disorder. We didn't even have the name for it then, but I had somebody that came back from a war zone and went from being a pretty good soldier to ending up being on the edge of being homeless. He had literally broken up with his wife, left his family, got fired from his job, gone to the VA. Somebody at the VA said, "This guy's losing it." And I went, "Losing what?" And they said, "Well, you know, he's losing his mind." And I went, "Well, I highly doubt that. After being in the amount of adrenaline that goes on in a war zone," and I don't have to tell you people in Israel about this, "you're going to have a hell of a lot more adrenaline when fighting and rockets are firing and bombs are going off and every day worrying whether this is going to be the day it happens or not happens than you would if you were sitting home before he left with his family, especially when you're talking an 18, 19-year-old kid. You know, this kid, he left for war when he was 20 years old. He was married and had 2 kids by that time, which to me is a little young, I would say, but a lot of people have children young. But when he came back, nothing seemed real. That's what he told me. He goes, "Nothing seems real." And I said, "Well, when you think about being in Vietnam, does that seem real?" And he said, "Oh, yeah." He goes, "It's crystal clear. Everything is vivid. I can hear every sound." And I said, "And when you think about being with your wife, what's that like?" Sorry. Anyway, he told me, he said, "It seems small. It's out of focus. I can't hear it really well." So I took him through a series of exercises and adjusted one. So where he had been, he started seeing himself in the memories. And the things that had happened in the past, like his children being born, got blown out of proportion. They became bigger than life. He was the first success I had with a post-traumatic stress son, and he gave me the answers. I didn't have the answers. He gave it to me. Now, when I see people, I know more what to do because a lot of it's similar. Not every case is the same, but your ability to ask good questions, which is what the meta model is for, and that's in the Structure of Magic, Richard Bandler's Guide to Transformations. It's even better in that. And in the new Structure of Magic, which will probably come out next year. Your ability to ask good questions, and those of you who have been to NLP trainings, they probably taught you the meta model. And if you learned it from somebody and they taught you, if somebody comes in and says depressed, and your first question is about what? And they tell you about my life, and then you go, how does your life depress you? You now have a formula to depress other people. When we use the meta model, we always go for the biggest chunk. When somebody comes in and goes, "I'm depressed," I always go, "How do you know that? Maybe you're not. Maybe you're happy." And they'll go, "No, I don't think I'm happy." And I go, "Well, how do you know you're depressed?" You begin to get a specific description of how they're thinking, which controls the way they feel. Whether it's the tone of their voice, the tempo of their voice, the location of the internal voice, the location of pictures, the size of pictures, the distance of pictures. All of these things are very controllable. And if we control the way we think, then we start to think on purpose. Most clients that came to me, when I ask them the simple question, I go, "How do you know you have a problem?" And they go, "Well, every time," a social phobic will say, "Every time I think about talking to somebody, I can remember how afraid I'm going to be." And I go, "Well, that's not really thinking." And they go, "Well, that's what I think." I go, No, that's what you remember. One remembers the past. One doesn't think the past. If you confuse your memories, with the device in your brain designed to plan, which is called thinking. Thinking is about what you're going to do. Now, if you do something well, like drive, remembering how to drive is fine. But if you get in a car and you're terrified and you can't start the engine because you were in an accident 3 weeks ago, you're not thinking about driving, you're remembering what happened. And if you get your memories confused with your plan, when you get in a car, you should be thinking about where you're going to go and how you're going to get there safely. And last night, I drove my son over to a place, my grandson to a place, and he pulled out his phone and turned on the GPS, and he told me to turn on a certain road, and then he told me to turn off the road. And I knew we weren't there yet. And I said, I'm not turning off because this would be way before we're supposed to be. And he said, but the GPS says. And I go, yeah, well, I trust the GPS until it's not right. I said, and then I'll trust my memory because I've been here once before. And, if I'm going to trust a device, if I get lost along the way, I may ask my GPS for help. And it, can be accurate. But if you insist that it is accurate, you're going to end up in the wrong place. Your memory is a lot like a GPS. Somebody else plotted it out. Somebody else planned it and programmed it. And sometimes those programs need to be updated. My car, I don't drive that much. So I have a 7-year-old car. My GPS doesn't even include a lot of the locations around here because they were built after those 7 years. And somebody said to me, why don't you update your GPS? And I said, well, it's good enough to get me where I need to go now. And if there reaches a point where I get lost, maybe I'll update it then. But at this point in time, I rely on myself more than I rely on machines, more than I rely on the opinions of other people. 95% of what I've accomplished in my life, I was told couldn't be done. I was told clients couldn't be helped. I was told that you can't train people to get over phobias in 20 minutes. And it turns out it's easier in 20 minutes than it is to do it over 5 years. The brain is designed to learn quickly, but you have to know about how it works, how the neurosynapses function, how everything in the brain is coded. Now, there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about. If your point of view, like the person who had post-traumatic stress, when people come in and they're suffering from grief for an extended, you're supposed to grieve when somebody dies. But I've had people that came in that had been grieving for 30 years over the loss of somebody, and they couldn't get beyond it. And that's because they keep thinking about the death of the person. You see, if you remember and, you go, well, I could never marry anybody else because I would be feel like I'm betraying this person. And to me, if you have good memories with somebody, when you see those good memories, I had a wife after being together for decades and decades passed away. And after she passed away, I have to admit, I went through a bad patch and I missed her terribly. I still miss her terribly, but when I think of her, I think of the good times and I see what I saw when I was there with her. I don't remember the terrible death. People who grieve too long remember the funeral. They remember being in the hospital. They remember the illness, the car accident, and they see the same thing they saw when they first found out these things happen. And when it happened, when it was going on, they don't take all of the great moments that they spent with that person and see it as if it's happening and see themselves at the funeral and themselves in the hospital. Because when you disassociate from bad memories, it allows you to be able to put them in the past. And people have to do this with war. They have to do it with death, because I guarantee you, every single love story will end as a tragedy. Someone will go and somebody will be left behind. Now, sometimes the difference between it, my mother had a boyfriend and he passed away. And then 6 years later, she passed away. But she was 91 when she passed away. And when I asked her, I said, do you want to go out and meet new people? And she said, nah. She said, I had a really good relationship for a lot of years. And she said, At this point in time, I want somebody to play poker with. I don't want somebody to live with. As it turned out, she had to go to a retirement home and ended up with more people than she would have ever planned on living. But life is always going to throw you a curve. And the question is, do you adapt or not? The successful organism adapts the fastest. And it's a great thing to have plans. You know, some people don't make good plans. So, you know, they don't plan on going on a diet and every once in a while falling off of it. My sound engineer that works with me in my studio, his wife is a heart surgeon's nurse. And so she put him on strict diets and makes him exercise a lot, which is not in the nature of musical people, I have to admit. And he told me one day, he said, we have to end early. And I said, and why do we have to end early? He said, it's Carb Friday. And I went, Carb Friday? And he went, yeah. He goes, my wife lets me eat carbs from 5 o'clock till 9 o'clock on Friday. And he goes, and I don't want to miss it. So the rest of the week, he eats and drinks and does things that are healthy for him. And then he takes one day off so that he can survive through the years. Making a plan that works for you, no matter what that plan is, and sticking to it. Now, sometimes things happen. COVID happened. It spoiled my plans from top to bottom. I had scheduled seminars in Europe and Germany and Italy, all over the place. And suddenly I was unemployed for the first time since I was 12. So we have to pivot at that point. And good things come out of it, like this. I'm talking to you on Zoom. This wouldn't have happened. Now, it's great to say that we need COVID to get smarter, because Zoom was there, but it wouldn't have never been used in the way that it is. Now, personally, I prefer to be there live and in person, but I've now talked to people in Brazil and Israel and countries that I never would have spoken to people. I never even would have probably thought about going, because I typically only go places where there's an institute that's well established and they invite me. I've gotten to the age now where I don't want to be the person that goes there the first time. And luckily I don't have to. If you plan your life well, you can go and make a plan, but when it doesn't work out, I know people that were crushed because they were planning to marry a single guy, and they were together for 5 years, and then the wedding got called off, and it turned out he was a cheat and a liar and a lot of other things. And they say to me, they go, well, how can I trust any man ever again? Well, when you make a bad choice, you have to figure out what it was based on, so that when you go to make a new choice, you do your homework a little better. When you consider the number of humans on this planet, the woman I told you about that was grieving for 30 years, she told me that her and her husband they did all kinds of things together. She said we would go shopping together. We did almost everything together. And then, he ran off with his secretary, and I had thought he died. She came in dressed in black. And she said to me, she said, no, she goes, he ran off with his dental assistant. And I went, really? Dental assistant? How cliche is that? And she said, I don't think I could ever be with another man. And I said, well, let's think about it a little differently. A lot of women can't pick a guy that lasts through lunch, right? They just have a bad picker. You had a picker that picked a guy that was good for almost 30 years, which means at your present age, you have to pick one more good guy, or maybe 1.5, depending upon how long you live. And I said, or you could sit and feel bad for the next 30 years. And which one sounds smart and which one sounds stupid? I have to admit, I ask most of my clients to do a little math when they come in. When they come in and tell me, I worry about this and I worry about that, and I think this is a bad thing, and I remember this bad thing. Whatever it is, I ask them, I go, how much time do you spend a day? You spend 2 minutes here, 3 minutes there, 4 minutes here, 5 minutes there. You sit and you go to bed at night and you think about it for 10 or 15 minutes. All told, what do you think it adds up to in a day? Because even something as simple as worrying about a problem, No, it doesn't matter what problem it is, but any problem you have. People told me that during this COVID thing, that they were worried, that they'd sit and they'd fret because their kids had to be online learning, and they would fret about this and fret about that. And I'd go, look, if it's 20 minutes a day, right, how much time do you think that is in a year? I mean, just off the top of your head. I'd go, what do you think? I mean, because it could be, could be a little bit, could be a lot, and it's it's not terribly a lot. It's, I don't know, probably 1,200 hours or 120 hours. What do you think? So if it's 120 hours in a year, that means in 10 years, it's 1,200. And in 40 years, it's 4,800. And if you go, your plan for your life right now is to take 4,800 hours in the next 40 years and spend them worrying. Does that sound smart? And typically when you start with people, a lot of them spend an hour a day fretting about something. Agoraphobics fret almost all day long about something. Even people with a height phobia spend more time worrying about high places than they do actually being afraid because they went into one. A true phobic typically won't get into an elevator and go to the top floor. I've had terrible people with, where they tell me, I have a flying phobia, so I drive everywhere. And I go, like, how far do you go? And I had one guy who had driven from New York to see me in California. And I thought, oh my God, that's a really long drive. And he said, if I took the train, it would be, this number of hours. He said, it only took me 57 hours to get here. And he said, that's if you count the stops and the lunch and all of this stuff. And I said, so you spent 57 hours getting somewhere you could be in 6 or 8 hours. And I said, and most of the time you spent thinking about doing it or thinking about flying. So you didn't even count the hours you felt bad where you weren't driving or flying. Just when you decided you wanted to see me, because he first asked me if I would fly to New York to see him. And I said, if I was going to New York, I would, but I'm not going to make a special trip. And he said, well, I could pay you a lot of money. And I said, nah, it's a waste of time. I said, I'm going to lose a day on either end and I have to go to the airport. It's a lot of trouble. I said, you want to see me. I don't want to see you. And I said, so you're going to have to get here. And then if you're going to drive here, rent a car because you're going to fly home. And he said he fretted about that the whole drive out. He said the whole time, all I thought about was having to get on a plane and fly home. As it turns out, it was no big deal. Because by the time I got done with him, changed the way he thought, then getting on a plane wasn't a big thing. He managed to make himself afraid. And that's how it happens. It doesn't happen by itself. You have to think certain things and talk to yourself in certain ways in order to create enough body sensations to generate up the number of fears. If you're spinning your fear this way, you slow it down. You speed it up and it'll get worse. You slow it down, spin it in the opposite direction, it will tone it down. Taking control, because what they call feelings are really part of your thinking. That the endemic nervous system has as many neural connections between the hollow and solid organs in the body and the intestines going up into the brain as the brain has. And the brain itself has billions and billions of neurons. There are as many neurons in your brain as there are stars in the sky. And each one is talking to 10 to 100 others. So the number of ways you could think is literally as infinite as the universe. However, most of us fall into very discrete patterns. And of course, we have the belief it's going to be hard. So therefore, we don't try. I was in the hospital once. I had a stroke some years ago. And the doctor came in and told me I would never walk again. And I asked him, I said, are you the hospital psychic? And he went, no. He said, my job is to read MRIs. And I said, good. And you read my MRI and it has the future in it, kind of like astrology? And he goes, no, it's nothing like astrology. It's science. And the truth is, had I listened to him, I would have never tried to walk again. And I may not walk as good as other people, but I walk good enough to get around. I walk onto airplanes. I walk through airports. I walk a lot of places. I limp now and then, but I walk. And I was at the gym yesterday exercising with the legs that should never have worked. And if you believe people, you don't try. If you believe yourself, it's even worse. You don't try. So you have to change the way in which you believe, which is a form of thinking, before you can change things. So I thought we would start this morning with a little exercise, because this is a master class. I want you guys to actually learn something. So what I want you to do is to get into groups of 3. And I want 2 of you to find out how the other one spends their time. The currency of living is how you spend the moments of your life. It's the currency of living isn't how much you have, because at some point you're not going to have it anymore. I'm sure the guy who owns Amazon just bought himself like a 300-foot yacht, had it designed. It's going to have a crew of 50 people. It'll probably spend most of its time sitting in a mooring place somewhere, funneling away billions of dollars, which he's got, so it don't matter. But when you have to sit around and buy a 300-foot yacht to try to be happy, I think you're working too hard. And to me, when you spend your time worrying about problems, thinking about difficulties, people tell me the biggest fear, by the way, of all is not elevators or driving or bees or insects or spiders. The biggest phobia of all is public speaking. Most people are terrified to get up in front of an audience. I think all the other phobias together, it's not as many people as public speaking. When we do live seminars, we bring in tarantulas, we bring in snakes that are as big as the stage, and take people who are terrified of them, and 20 minutes later, they're holding a spider in their hand, they're holding a snake, because the fear isn't in the object. The amazing thing about your fears is that you have them when the objects aren't there. When you ask somebody, what are you afraid of? And they go, oh, I'm terrified of snakes. Well, there are some snakes you just shouldn't touch. So that's not a bad thing, but being afraid of them when there's no snake there, because even when we tell people, well, we're going to bring snakes into the seminar, there'll be people that jump up and run out of the room, and they're not coming for a week. And that tells you that the fear doesn't reside in the snake. The fear resides in their thinking. And when, when I bring a spider in and I've got somebody who's afraid of a spider, and I get them to relax and concentrate and think about it differently, and then suddenly they've got a spider in their hand, the most important thing about it is not holding a spider, because there's no real profession about spider holding unless you're the spider wrangler that brings the spiders into the seminar. He gets paid to do that, but he spends his days going to elementary schools and zoos and all kinds of places. For the person in my seminar, the most important thing is to discover that when you're wrong about yourself, that can be the best thing ever, because it means there's lots of things you might be wrong about. And with my clients, getting them to face their fear without being afraid. It's not enough to face your fear and be terrified. That'll just reinforce it. You have to think so differently that you see the same thing that scared you and not be afraid. Because what that means is if you're wrong about that, it means you're probably wrong about everything that you've hesitated to do. So that if you can look at something that the thought of it scares you, or it makes you worry intensely, and then look at exactly the same thing in your mind and feel differently, that's a great thing. So we're going to try a little experiment. I want you to sit down, and I want 2 of you to find out from the third one, either what scares them, what they spend time worrying about too much, anything that's like that. They don't even have to tell you what it is. They only have to tell you about it. When you think about it, how big is the picture? Is it life size, larger than life, or is it only this big? How close is it to you, right? Does it have a border? Do you see yourself in it, or do you not see yourself in it? Now, once you know that, all I want you to do is reverse it. So if it's really big, make it really small. If it's really close, make it far away, so that they're looking at exactly the same thing. If they don't see themselves in the picture, have them see themselves being terrified. If they run the movie forwards, have them run it backwards. If it's a little movie and they see themselves running away from the spider, then run it backwards so that they run towards the spider. Whatever it is, just reverse it. And if you reverse it, and I'm not talking about spending half an hour, I'm talking about spending 3 minutes finding out how they think about it and 2 minutes reversing it so that you're looking at it differently. Most of the time with phobias, I have people think about what they're terrified, put a border around it. So if it's a spider, they see a big spider. Typically, they don't see a little tiny spider, even though they're more poisonous. They have a big giant spider the size of a lobster, and it's jumping on them. So I have them freeze it, put a border around it, shrink it down to the size of a nickel, and blink it black and white. And when they do that, then when they go back and look at it, they don't feel so afraid. If the feeling goes this way, I have them make it go faster so it goes worse, and then slow it down, and then spin it in the opposite direction. All of these things have taken care of so many problems on this planet. It's ridiculous. I do it. My trainers do it. By the way, if you're looking for a trainer, we've got the NLPtrainers.com. So you can look up people, and whether they're in Israel, you know some of the trainers that put this on, but there are other trainers. There are trainers in England. There are trainers who do Zoom things, and there are people like me that prefer to be there in person. But if COVID comes along, I'm willing to do this as well. So let's break into groups, give it a try. Just see if you can take a little of your worry and make it disappear, a little of your fear, make it disappear. And we'll take 10 minutes apiece.
Okay. There's going to be 4 people in the breakout rooms because we've got so many people here, but you can do 3 with 1 and then quick swap. Do it fast, people. You've got 10 minutes to do the whole caboodles. So
10 minutes apiece.
Oh, 10 minutes apiece. So what do you want to give them?
So we'll come back in, let's say, 20 minutes.
Okay, good. So it's 54 now. 20 minutes after that is 14. See you back here at 14. And then we'll have a cute, you can ask Richard any questions about the exercise. And then, I don't know, maybe...
Pretty much anything else if you want.
Anything else. Okay. So 20 minutes. Can you put them in the breakout rooms, Mickey? Thank you so much.
נראה, שומעים אותי?
הנה. עכשיו שומעים אותי? רגע.
עכשיו שומעים אותי? אותי? חלש, אז כנראה...
טוב. כן, כן, שומעים אותי? יופי.
בסדר? תזכיר את זה פעם? כן,
איך זה מיוצג אצלך במוח, ודבר ראשון להבין איך זה מיוצג, ואז לשנות את החושים.
זו שאלה של דרגות של פחד. זו שאלה. יש דברים שהם פחות מפחידים, יותר מפחידים. זה לא משנה מה בעצם. חשוב.
אני אגיד לכם, יש לי יום הולדת 40 בעוד חודשיים.
מזל טוב.
תודה. וכחלק מהדברים שאני רוצה, לא יודע אם ביום הולדת עצמו, בשנה, אני רוצה לעשות צניחה חופשית, מפריע לי מפעם, אבל אני ככה מפחיד. סליחה?
לא, התמונה נתקעה לאיזה כמה שניות, אז לא...
אמרתי שיש לי מטרה השנה לעשות איזושהי צניחה חופשית. גבהים זה משהו שפעם היה אצלי הרבה יותר חזק, הפחד, היום פחות, אבל עדיין קיים.
יפה.
אז אוקיי. כן. אוקיי, אז היא מאוד קרובה אליי, כאילו זה ממש אני רואה את עצמי פה. אני רואה את עצמי מבחוץ, אבל ממאוד קרוב, אוקיי? זה כזה יוצא לי, זה סרט, זה אני כמה שניות בפנים, כמה שניות בחוץ. בצבע, ואני שומע את הרעש של המטוס מאוד חזק באוזניים, ומעורר פה איזושהי תחושה גם בלב, גם בידיים, רגליים, מין רעד כזה. התמונה היא גדולה וקרובה, כן. כן. כן, יותר גדול. כן, כאילו כזה, כן. יותר גדולה ממני. כן, כן. עוד לא הגעתי לקופץ, אבל כן, כרגע לא, אמרתי לגבי החיבור שאני רואה את עצמי לפעמים מתוך העיניים שלי, ולפעמים אני רואה את עצמי מבחוץ, כזה כמה שניות פה, כמה שניות פה. כן. כרגע אני רואה את עצמי מבחוץ. כן. כן. נכון. לא משהו קבוע, אני מניח כשזה ממש מתחיל עד דפיקות לב, אז פתאום אני יוצא החוצה. כן. אוקיי. כן. 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 אוקיי. כן. כן. קריאת אונו. כן. עכשיו זה, לא... לא שמעתי את זה? אבי, נקטעת לי? כן. לא, כשאני רואה את זה פה הרבה יותר רגוע. רגוע, בטוח. מהמם. מי עכשיו? תודה.
לנסות. אני מנסה לחשוב על משהו צריך למסגר מחדש כרגע. כרגע אני מרצה באקדמיה, וכרגע הציעו לי להיות דירקטור של איזו חברה חיצונית, ואני מאוד מאוד מתלבט, אחרי 20 שנה שלי באקדמיה, פתאום מציעים לך בעצם להקים חברה. אני בהתלבטות מאוד גדולה, לא איזה פחד, אבל איזשהו מקום מה אני עושה עכשיו? זה לא פחד קיומי, זה פחד, זה יותר החלטה מורכבת. אז איך שאני רואה את זה, אז זה די קרוב.
את מה בדיוק אתה רואה?
אז אני רואה שני עיגולים.
אבל לפני איך אתה רואה, מה זה בדיוק? מה הדבר שאתה רואה? כי אמרת שזו התלבטות בין...
אני רואה, בדיוק, אני מסביר, אני רואה שני עיגולים.
כן.
ועיגול אחד כזה שזה צד אחד, ועיגול שני זה צד שני. ואני לא יודע, אני רואה את עצמי שאני מנסה לבחור אחד מהם, ואני לא יודע איפה לשים את היד שלי. עכשיו, שני עיגול, זה מה שאני רואה.
כן. לגבי התרגיל, כלומר זה, היות ויש פה בעצם התלבטות, איזשהו קונפליקט בין...
פחד להחליט.
שתי אופציות. הפחד הוא להחליט?
הפחד הוא להחליט. זה בדיוק הנקודה. אני מפחד להחליט, כי אם אני בוחר אחד, אז זה עלול לגרום לי נזק. אז יש לי כאן איזשהו דילמה שבעצם מכניס אותי למקום של פחד. כי מה שאני לא עושה, אני עלול להפסיד. כלומר, אני יכול להישאר במקום שאני כרגע נמצא, אבל זה מפחיד אותי, כי זו הצעה שיכול להיות שווה מיליונים. אז מצד אחד אם אני הולך על זה, אני עלול להפסיד את כל מה שיש לי היום. כי אם אני עוזב את האקדמיה וזה נופל, אז אין לי כלום. אז השורש פה של הקושי בהחלטה זה פחד, לא להישאר בלי כלום, להיות קרח משני צדדים.
אז הפחד, אז מה שיש שם, לצורך התרגיל הזה, כן? אנחנו לא בטיפול עכשיו בקליניקה, אבל העניין פה הוא או לעבוד על הפחד, איך הפחד מיוצג אצלך, או לקחת אחד מהם ובאמת למצוא שם את הפחד מההחלטה הלא נכונה, ועליו לעבוד.
זה יותר אני מניח שבסוף אני אוכל לקבל את שניהם, זאת אומרת, זה הפחד בעצם להתקדם. שניהם.
הפחד הוא להתקדם.
אני יוצא את שניהם בסופו של דבר.
כן.
גם זה טוב וגם זה טוב. אבל זה מאוד, אני רואה הרבה עומס פה. כלומר, יש פה...
אוקיי. אז עכשיו בעומס, איך אתה רואה את העומס?
כרגע אני, כתמונה, אני רואה איזה סקאלה...
איך שזה...
אני רואה איזה בת חום כזה, אוקיי, שהוא עומד על 150 מעלות, אבל המעלות זה האחוזים של החיים שלי כרגע, שאני כרגע עובד על 150, והוא אדום ובוהק, הוא בזכוכית, ואני רואה ככה, מסתכל למעלה, אני רואה את הקצה של המדחום הזה, שהוא מתחמם ועלול להתפוצץ כל רגע. זו התמונה שיש לי כרגע.
זו התמונה, המדחום, הבוהק הזה.
בדיוק, שהוא כבר בשיא החום שלו.
אוקיי.
ועוד, כאילו זה, אני לוקח עוד טיפה, או שישבר או שימשיך, אני לא יודע, אבל זו התמונה.
אוקיי, ולפי איך שסימנת עם הידיים, גם אני רואה שהוא מאוד קרוב אליך.
הוא קרוב וגבוה אבל. כאילו, הקצה שלו מעבר לשדה הראייה שלי.
אוקיי.
כאילו אני רואה מסגרת, אבל רק את החלק התחתון של המסגרת.
אוקיי.
אני רואה איפה הוא מתחיל, אבל אני צריך כאילו להסתכל למעלה, כדי לראות את הפס העליון של המסגרת.
אוקיי. אז אבל אני אבקש ממך עכשיו לקחת את המסגרת בעצם, ולצייר מסגרת לכל המדחום הזה. לכל המדחום הזה, לצייר לו איזושהי מסגרת, ככה כמו שהוא כאן לידך קרוב, לשים אותה במסגרת, ואת המסגרת הזו, כמו שאני עשיתי לפני כמה דקות, לקחת וכמו בטלפון, באייפון, באנדרואיד, מה שיש לך, פשוט לקחת לרגע ולהקטין, להקטין עד שיהיה משהו בערך בגודל הזה. וכשיש לך את הריבוע הזה, שהמדחום נמצא בריבוע כזה, פשוט לקחת ולהרחיק אותו ממך, להרחיק אותו כמה שיותר רחוק בחדר, שתראה אותו, אבל שהוא יהיה ממש ממש בקטן. וכשהוא שם בקטן, המדחום הזה גם את הצבעים הבוהקים האלה, תהפוך בבקשה לשחור לבן.
אוקיי.
ועכשיו כשהוא שם רחוק ממך ושחור לבן, מה ההבדל בתחושה שלך? כשאתה מסתכל עליו, שהוא שם רחוק.
התחושה היא שהוא לא מציק, זאת אומרת, לא מרגיש אותו פעם, הוא רחוק.
הוא שם רחוק.
כן, סוג של הקלה, כי אני לא מרגיש אותו כרגע.
כן. זה בעצם, זו היכולת שלך, כמו שריצארד אמר, ההקלה הזו, התחושה, זה מה שיוצר בסופו של דבר מחשבות, זה מה שיוצר פרשנויות, ובעצם תהליך שלך, ובטח גם אתה תוכל עוד לעבוד על זה, ובעצם לקחת, לייצר, ככל שתראה את הדבר הזה יותר רחוק, יותר קטן, שיש שחור לבן, ככה תוכל גם לעשות לפחד השני, ובעצם ככל שהתחושה הזו בגוף שלך תהיה יותר ויותר קלה, פחות מעיקה, ככה תוכל גם לקבל את ההחלטה הנבונה יותר, המושכלת יותר.
כן.
נראה לי אבל שיהיה בסדר בכל מקרה, אתה תיקח את ההחלטה הטובה.
כן, שאלה מאיפה יבוא המיליונים.
תגיד, אני שואל את שאלה, אבי.
כן.
אני יכול לשאול לך כמה שאלות?
בטח.
תגיד, האקדמיה שאתה נמצא, אתה דוקטור? כאילו אתה מרצה דוקטור?
אני עובד על דוקטורט שלי, אני עובד במחקר, כן.
ועכשיו נגיד את הסיטואציה שאתה אומר שאתה בעצם חייב לבחור, אתה אומר, ואתה לא יכול לעשות כאילו גם להמשיך באקדמיה ועדיין...
אני מחפש לראות איך אני עושה את שניהם.
אם אתה יכול לעשות את שניהם, או אפילו להוריד, אתה יודע, הילוכים מאחד ולהעלות הילוכים בשני.
כן.
ואז אין לך בעצם את הפחד, אין לך את ההחלטה. ודבר שני, שתחשוב על המקרה הכי גרוע, נגיד את ה-worst case scenario, נגיד שעזבת את האקדמיה, כן? נגיד.
worst case, אני לא מוטרד, כלכלית אני לא מוטרד.
לא, עזוב, נגיד שעזבת, העסק ההוא קרס. אתה יכול לחזור לאקדמיה, נכון? אני מאמין שאתה יכול. כאילו, יש לך יכולות, אני לא מאמין שלא ירצו את היכולות שלך, כן? זאת אומרת, הכי גרוע, כביכול, אתה גם יכול לחזור בחזרה לאקדמיה. גם אם הלכת בכל הכוח על האופציה השנייה.
כן.
נכון? זאת אומרת שכאילו, הפחד הזה הוא יותר הבחירה עצמה מאשר העתיד.
כן, אני לא מוטרד כלכלי.
הבחירה עצמה, זאת אומרת, על המהלך הזה, כן? על המהלך עצמו.
כן.
עכשיו, האמת היא שזה גם די הגיוני, כי אם אני אחשוב על זה עליי, נגיד, דברים שאני עשיתי בחיים, כן? והיו, כמו שהולך הביטוי הזה, לשרוף את כל הקשרים, כמו שאומרים, כן? ויש לך רק דרך אחת ללכת עליה, כמו שאומרים בסיפור הזה, אם שמעת עליו, על הגנרל הזה, כן? לא יודע אם שמעת על זה, יש איזה גנרל, לפני שכבשו את ארצות הברית, הוא הגיע לאחד האיים שם באנגליה, לא יודע מה, והוא בא עם כל החיילים שלו, ירדו מהספינות, הם ירדו על האי, ואז הוא אומר לחיילים שלו, לכולם, לשרוף את הספינות. אז כולם עומדים, והם כאילו בשוק, אומרים, מה פתאום, למה שנשרוף? איך נחזור חזרה? לבית שלנו. אז הוא אומר להם, זה בדיוק העניין, אין דרך חזרה. אז הם שורפים את הספינות, ואו שאנחנו מנצחים פה באי הזה, או שאנחנו מתים על האי. זאת אומרת, או כמו להיות או לחדול כזה, כן? והם הולכים בכל הכוח והם באמת מנצחים. לפעמים לשרוף את הקשרים זה לא דבר רע, אלא זה דבר שייתן לך אפילו אמביציה עוד יותר חזקה, דווקא להצליח חזק, כי אין לך תוכנית B, C ו-D. יש לך A ואתה הולך עליה בכל הכוח. ובכך הגרוע היא לא עובדת, אז אתה באמת יכול לבנות תוכנית B, C ו-D. אבל ללכת עם כל הכוחות שלך על משהו אחד, וכל האנרגיה על משהו אחד, זה שונה מאשר לחלק את האנרגיה שלך, כמו שאומרים. כן? ולפעמים זה באמת נותן לאנשים אתה יודע, הרבה אנשים צריכים את הרשת ביטחון, אתה צודק. את הקרקע הבטוחה שאם יפלו...
דווקא זה לא, זה יותר עניין של מעמד.
כן, מעמד.
כסף דווקא לא מטריד אותי, לא בשלב זה בחיים.
טוב, אנחנו צריכים לחזור.
כן, חוזרים חזרה. יאללה, ביי חבר'ה.
תודה רבה לכולם.
ביי, התראות, ביי ביי.
ביי.
This meeting is being recorded.
Here we go.
Okay, I'll ask people for questions so they can post them. אז חברים, אם יש לכם שאלות, אתם מוזמנים לכתוב בקבוצת הוואטסאפ, בבקשה אם אפשר באנגלית, ולאורה תבחר ותפנה אליכם. Okay, so people, if you got questions, write them in English, please, in the WhatsApp group, and we will pick the brightest, the brilliant, and the interesting questions for Richard.
Yeah, find some interesting questions for Richard about what he's been talking about and what he's been doing. Right?
I don't care what the question's about. If it's an interesting question, it's an interesting question.
Okay, cool. Let's go then. What have we got?
Okay, let's see now.
Who's got a question for Richard?
Yeah, 1 second, let's see. We had an interesting early question.
Good.
If you find it, you can find the person who wrote it down so he can ask it. Here we go. Arnon, are you here?
Can he unmute?
Unmute Arnon. I'll find him. Arnon.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me put you on view, and let me find you. There we go. At Spotlight. There you go, Arnon. Please, you can ask your interesting question.
Yeah. Hello. Hi, Dr. Bander.
Hello.
Hello. It's a great honor to meet you. And
well, thank you very much. Let's get to the question, shall we?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the L in NLP.
The what?
Because the L.
Hell.
The NL.
The linguistic?
The letter. Yes, the linguistic.
Yes, it comes from the English alphabet.
Yeah, I know. But I've heard some theories that the L is the language to the programs, to program the nervous system, and I heard theories that it is the language of speaking, of how we should speak. So I wanted to ask you.
Basically, who's ever telling you this theory is making it a lot more complicated than it is. When John and I started, we didn't have a name for what we did. It was just called Meta Model. And a policeman pulled me over when I was driving a little too fast. And he looked down, and I probably had 100 books in the car. You know, I'd just been to the science library. I took everything they had. And he said, what do you do for a living? And, you know, because I had these books. And I looked down on the floor. There was a neurology book, a linguistics book, and a manual for a PDP 1134, which is a deck machine. And I just took a word off of each one, neuro-linguistic programming. And I said, I'm a neuro-linguistic programmer. And he went, oh, that sounds important. When I got a sign made and put it in my office, almost every therapist hated the name. They said it's not very feeling. But apparently it caught on. It's because we studied Chomsky's work. The linguistic book, by the way, was the one John Grinder wrote with somebody else. And I think he had written it before I met him. It was on transformational linguistics. Transformational linguistics is a model of neurology. It's probably the first model of neurology that ever existed that connects neurology with what humans actually do. All the rest of them are models of how a nerve works, or, they're all about slices in time. And when people studied neurology, they used to cut people's heads open and shock them, and somebody would remember something and they'd go, that's where memory is. That's just poor thinking. It's not systemic thinking. If you open up your television and go in the back and cut a wire and the picture goes sideways, the wire isn't what holds it straight. It's bad science. And in heart, I'm a real scientist. There are two kinds of scientists. There are scientists that try to explain things, and there are scientists that actually build things that work. And see, if you build a toaster and it doesn't make toast, it's not a toaster in my world. And there are a lot of theoretical scientists that study the brain and come up with elaborate theories, but they can't get anybody to do anything differently. And, when you start helping people get over strokes, and people, that like Moshe Feldenkrais, who was from Israel, and he would take people that had been shot and their nerves were damaged, and the neurologist would go, there's no way this guy will ever play the flute again. And the next thing you know, Moshe's got him playing the flute. To me, that's the difference between a real scientist and a scientist that just believes theories. They were taught something, they believe it, and they will defend it to the death. It's almost like a religion, if you ask me. And in psychology, they were the worst because there were so many of them, the Freudians, the neo-Freudians, the Gestalt therapy people, Virginia Satir's people, the transactional analysis, the humanistic psychologists, and they all had elaborate theories, and anything that didn't fit the theory doesn't count. To me, I'll give up whatever, I'll change. I disagree with myself 5 years later because I do it all the time because they're not theories, they're models. Models are a description of how you do something. Cookbooks are a model of how you do something. And the linguistics, we use linguistics as a way of being able to precisely ask questions. The more precisely you can use the meta model, the faster you can get things done, and the more often you'll be able to do something new. If I have a client that comes in and they simply don't know how to do something, they're incapable of doing it, I'll find somebody who did it and find out what they're doing better. And I do this all the time with sports. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination what you could call an athlete. When somebody came into me and he had a problem, he was a baseball player and he was just on the edge of getting cut from the big leagues because he couldn't hit the ball as well as other people. I went and found somebody who hit the ball consistently a lot better than he did and found out how the guy thought about it, came back and got the guy to change the way he was thinking so he thought like the guy who hit the ball more often. And, and it was, by the way, he went into an altered state. When he even told me, he goes, some days you're just hitting the ball because you can really see it. And when I said, what does it look like? He goes, it's bigger, it's moving slower. Oh, he does time distortion. All of these are things that happen in altered states. Just before you get in an accident and you avoid something, time slows down. It looks like it's going in slow motion. The brain can do all of these things. Learning to do them on purpose is what makes an athlete great at what they do. And some sports, like in the Olympics, the difference between winning and losing isn't physical skill because it boils down sometimes to 1/10 or 100th of a second. It's all mental. And if they're not in the right mental state, then they don't perform consistently as well. We use linguistics to be able to get people to think different, both by the way we describe it to them, by using it as a tool to find out how others think better, and also to find out what somebody's doing, because a lot of times that will explain what difficulties they're having. The meta model is the foundation. It's the linguistic part of NLP. And it's based on Chomsky's work. We use Chomsky's categories, but Chomsky may have known what a deletion is, but he didn't know what to do about it. And what John and I did was found better ways to ask questions. And over the years, we found better orders in which to ask those questions. So the better you are at the meta model, the easier your job will be. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, you bet.
Cool, great. Thank you very much, Arnon. Richard, I've got a question for you, an interesting question. Let me just fix this. Okay, you've talked a lot about the spinning, the kinesthetic spinning.
About what?
Kinesthetic spinning, emotional spinning.
Well, I don't call it emotional. It feels emotional. When you feel angry or you feel motivated or you feel, something, people call those emotions. But to me, the fact that we call them emotions is what psychologists do. What we do is start to find out where they start, how they get stronger, what direction they move, and where they go when they go away. We want more details in how they function, because the more details you have, the more you can do it on purpose.
So my question is,
yes,
how do you do, or what exactly do you do if you want to do this type of work with decision making or with problematic decision making?
Well, decisions are more complicated because it requires more than one thing. If you make decisions only on how you feel, you're going to be in deep shit. That's all there is to it, because you won't even know what you're deciding on about. You have to start with, have a subject. So you have to have pictures, you have to be able to compare those pictures. And most of the time people make decisions either based on too much information or too little. I mean, drug addicts take drugs because they see their mind, the drug, and they go, I will feel better. But they don't run the movie over 10 years to find out how much trouble it'll get them into. And, people who are compulsive spenders go, if I buy this, I'll be happy, but they don't ask the question for how long. You need to run these movies a little longer to find the right length so that you can make the right decision. And then you also have to ask the big question, which is what most people don't when they make decisions. How will this benefit you now and in the long run? Because if you can't answer the question, you're headed for a bad decision.
So you talked about decisions and thinking on purpose.
Yes, I did. I remember I wrote.
So my question is, Could you elaborate on that a bit here for our audience? I will
They don't have to buy the book. Is that what you're talking about?
To make them more interested in buying the book so we can translate.
You look at your past and you go, this was a bad decision. This was a good decision, right? You can go and examine those and find out how you got to a good decision and how you got to a bad decision. Typically, they're not even located the same place in your brain, but the important part isn't where they are now. The question is, what led you to that? You know, and a lot of times people, when they're deciding things, as things get closer, they end up making decisions. And sometimes when they make bad decisions, it's because they feel rushed. They go, well, you know, if I need a car in the next week. My son left his car in another state when he moved here. And he told me, he goes, I have to get a car right away. And I said, no, you don't. I said, you could rent a car for a while. You know, it's like, you know, if people who are moving here are buying houses before they get here, because everybody's moving to Texas for some reason. They don't like the taxes in California, I think. And the fact they're all wearing masks still, and Texas is the freedom state, and so is Florida. So a lot of people are moving there. And my daughter's a real estate agent. She goes, people are buying houses without even seeing them. They're just going online, seeing a house and buying it. And of course, when they get here, the pictures may not live up to the ones in their head. And, you know, some things you need to run a little time. A lot of people get married because they want a wedding and they don't think about what comes afterwards. That is the foundation of bad relationships. They go, oh, it's going to be a beautiful wedding. And when you start out spending $300,000 on a day and you haven't got enough money to buy a house or go to college, that's just bad planning. You know, and I can't tell you how many times people have come up and told me, they go, oh, I'm getting married. It's going to be a beautiful wedding. And then I go, where are you going to live? And they go, oh, we'll find a place. And they go, but I've spent 7 months planning my wedding. You should make sure that you plan the rest of your life as well. Like, make sure you want to be in the same room with this person for a long time. That, you know, if you have trouble being in the same room with them for a long time, you really don't want to marry them. You know, just throw a birthday party or something. If you're just looking, and they go, well, I always imagined the white dress and all of this. And I go, yeah, you have to imagine what comes afterwards and think about it. This is a big decision. It's like sometimes people, you know, they go to college and they go, because I want to be a lawyer because they look cool on television. And then they discover lawyers have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning just to get to court. And, you know, I know one guy went all the way through law school. He went to Harvard. He went through law school. He became a lawyer. And then he went back to college to become something else because he discovered he hated being a lawyer. He never put himself in the picture and found out all the little stuff you have to do over and over again. You know, when you're planning your future, you really have to be able to put yourself in the daily life of things. When I made a bad decision once, I moved to Hawaii because I loved going on vacation there. And I thought, well, it'd be like being on vacation all the time. And then when I got there, I discovered there were a lot of drawbacks. There was just a lot of things about living in Hawaii, like, you know, it just didn't have it. At the time, it was technologically not as advanced as the rest of the United States. And even for my mother to call me on the phone was an expensive venture. We had no cell phones in those days. And a lot of the people that there were interested in things I wasn't interested in. I mean, all anybody wanted to talk about was fishing. And I enjoyed fishing, but I didn't want to talk about it every single day over and over and over again. You know, it just wasn't that fascinating. So you have to really imagine when you make big decisions, and when you discover you make the wrong decision, the sooner you stop, the smarter you are. You know, that's one of those things where sometimes people do things way too long and they let them get out of control and they don't think, you know, how is this situation benefiting me? They start thinking, you know, how can I make it a little better? That's really a bad question to ask. How can I tolerate this? You know, how can, you know, people don't have grand enough plans. The trick is you can either dream big so that when you fail, you're 90 times wherever you would have been, or you look at your situation and go, how can I make it tolerable? And, that's really not the right question. Do you really want to think that your plan for the rest of your life is to figure out how to tolerate being alive? That's a bad question to ask. And a lot of my clients come in and they go, well, I've been trying to figure out how to live with my problem. And I go, you want to live with your problem? I said, you come to the wrong place. You hang around me, you're not even going to know what your problem was. If nothing else, I'll hypnotize you and give you amnesia for it. I mean, I took a smoker once that came in and his doctor sent him, and he had started to get emphysema. And the doctor said, he's got to quit right away. So I put him in a trance and I gave him amnesia for having ever been a smoker. And I realize in Israel, you're not allowed to do as many trances as we could in the United States, but it just seemed like a place to start. And sure enough, next week he came back, but he brought his wife with him and she was furious. And I said, well, he quit smoking. And she goes, well, he hasn't smoked cigarettes, but he keeps telling me he never smoked. And I showed him pictures of himself smoking and he says, there's no cigarette. And I said, he's lying to himself, but this time it's working. Better he lie to himself than you. And she goes, well, that's what I'm angry about. He's lying to me. And I said, no, he's pretending. He's just mastered it. And, Milton said once to me, when I went to visit him, he had a client and he was working with this client. And he turned around and he looked at me and he said, you can pretend anything and master it. And that's what we do as children. We pretend things and then we master it. And you have to pretend, but you have to pretend wholeheartedly to make good decisions. You have to be able to go in and see what you would have to do. The fact that, you see these guys on Wall Street, driving fancy cars and having yachts, but yet they're in there every day in that office staring at a computer screen. And, when you get rich, then you have to have accountants and taxes. There's a lot of stuff that goes with these things that people don't really think through. A lot of people they want power because they feel they won't be unhappy. And the question is, you should learn to be happy, and then you should learn how to be happier. You shouldn't be striving to be happy when you retire. I mean, I met people that told me, and they go, well, I'm planning when I retire to go do this, and then I'll be happy. And I said, well, what would happen if you got there and you discovered you didn't like those things? They were going to move to some remote area by a lake and fish all day long. And I said, what's going to happen if you work for 40 years and then you discover that was the wrong choice? Wouldn't it be better to find out if you really like those things, like go spend a few months there and see if that's how you want to live, and then plan to maybe get there sooner. Maybe you could just get a job by a lake instead of working to some job you hate your whole life, so that you could be happy when you're 65. Because most people, they try that and they end up dropping dead before they get to enjoy it. They're so stressed out by the job they hate that they end up having a heart attack, and somebody else gets to be happy with their life insurance. One time I went to a seminar and it was about, planning your future. And there was this guy got on stage and he said, I can see my future. I'm going to have a big house. I'm going to have 3 cars. My family's all going to be dressed in the finest clothes. We're going to have a yacht. And I asked him, I said, so you see your family, you see the house, you see the yacht. And he goes, yeah. And I said, are you in the picture? And the guy said, what do you mean? I said, when you look at this, do you see yourself? And he goes, well, no, I don't see myself. And I said, so you died of a heart attack and these people bought all the stuff with your life insurance. And the guy running the seminar got furious at me. He goes, that's not, you're trying to interfere with people's dreams. And I said, no, I'm trying to have them so they get to be happy all the way to acquiring those things. But if they think those things are going to make them happy, they might be wrong. And so they should find out a way to be happy. There used to be a commercial on when I was a kid about going on cruise lines. And they said getting there is at least half the fun. And sort of stuck in my mind with my clients. They weren't looking at how to be happy right away and then get even happier as time went along. The Dalai Lama was interviewed one time and they asked him Ted Koppel asked him, he said, "Are you really happy?" And he said, "Oh, yes, I'm happy all the time." He goes, "Sometimes a pebble hits a lake and ripples the water, but it goes back to calm." And most people should learn that they should set the static state of their life so that they're calm, they're happy, they're determined, they have strong beliefs, and they're headed in the right direction. So that when crap comes along like COVID, or a neighbor moves in who's an asshole, then you have the strength to deal with these things. And I want all of my clients to have the strength to deal with whatever comes their way. But in the meanwhile, they feel good. And, psychologists used to say he has a low self-esteem. And I don't even understand the concept. I think it's a lot of hooey. I want them to have a purpose, because I wrote a book called The Secrets of Being Happy. And I interviewed people who had been through the worst of things: Holocaust victims, prisoners of war from Vietnam, people who had come out of those things who were living well and really happy people. And then people who had come out and couldn't get over it. And I found the difference between them is when they were there, they had a plan. Their plan is I'm not going to suffer through this forever. So I'm going to think about what life's going to be like afterwards. And I'm going to, they planned to, one of them literally planned to go back to his parents' farm and imagine planting crops. And another guy was going to open a haberdashery in New York, and he had seen the inside of the store. And when I interviewed him in the store. And it requires a sense of humor. And I got news for you: the older you get, the more courage you need. Growing old is not easy, and more things will come your way. You'll have more problems, and not just your problems. You'll have your family's problems and your grandchildren's problems. And if you don't have a sense of humor and a sense of purpose that in your life, you're always going to feel less than. You'll start comparing yourself with other people. If people come up to me and they go, "You're not as good at NLP as you are," and I'll go, "Of course not. I've been doing this for 50 years. I made it up. How could you be better than the person who made it up? I'm sorry, you just can't." I mean, I realize there are a lot of other organizations out that give certificates, but they're giving you certificate about things that are in my book, and I'm not sure they understand them. I've had people explain NLP to me. They didn't know who I was at the time, but boy, I can't tell you how wrong some of these people are. It's amazing. In 1978, I got on an airplane, and here was this guy reading The Structure of Magic, and which had been out about 3 years. So I looked at him and I said, "Oh, are you a magician?" And the guy goes, "No, this is not about doing card tricks or something. This is important stuff." And then he said, "You probably wouldn't understand it." Well, actually, nobody can understand what you make up better than you. That's why you should all make up your own future. Next question.
Okay, I got a good question from Itai Lerech. Itai, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Good morning, Richard. I was wondering, how do you keep track of all the various ends of loops you open and close when you speak publicly? What's your method?
One at a time. I'm not kidding. One at a time. I know where
I'm like 12 at a time.
Next. And so I only have to know where I'm going and how to get back. And I have a map in my head, and it lights up. It says, "This is next." And then when I get to that, then it lights up the next one, and I know where to go. It's just like the chart in the manual. It has nested loops, and I start on this loop, and then I go to this loop and that loop. I don't think about it all at once. I just think what I have to do next.
What's the next?
And depending upon where I am and who I'm talking to. I mean, I talk to insurance agents, CEOs, scientists, athletes. My audiences are as varied as you could possibly get. And depending upon the content, I have to draw from my experience. The best thing is to see a lot of clients, so you have a lot of history. A lot of people skip over the hard work of NLP, but you need to see athletes, you need to see businessmen, you need to talk to salespeople, You need to talk to people from different walks of life, different religions, different countries. When Owen asked me once when he was really young, Owen probably started younger, Owen Fitzpatrick, than any other NLP trainer. I think he was 10 or 12 or 13 when he started. And he asked me one time when he was in his early 20s, he said, what should I do to get really good at NLP? And I said, go to as many places as you can and talk to as many different people as you can. I said, if you go to a country, don't just talk to the guy in a hotel, go out and meet the locals. You know, I went to Tahiti and hired a guy with a little boat to take me around the atoll when there wasn't even an island there anymore, and started asking him questions, you know, because he seemed like a really cheerful, happy guy that he goes, oh, we're going to have a great time today. And he says, I'm going to show you where the shells hide and where the mantas hide, you know. And he looked at me at one point and he said, have you been to Bora Bora? And I said, yeah, I was just there. He goes, is it true there's 1,000 people in Bora Bora? To him seemed overwhelming. And you couldn't imagine 1,000 people being in the same place. And I said, where I come from, there's over 10 million people. And he went, really? He said, they must all be very friendly to live together like that, which is a much better attitude than the 10 million people that lived around me.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. We got another one?
Yeah, Mickey's coming on.
We've got another one. Mark, are you here? Let me find you. There you go. Mark, you're welcome to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. I'll go straight to the question.
Okay.
So, nowadays, NLP is being taught as a methodology. There are certain techniques, there are best practices. But as far as I know,
as a what?
It's being taught nowadays as a methodology. We teach techniques, there are best practices. But as far as I know, when NLP started, it was the curious approach to the subjective experience. So my question is, how do we keep the field alive into the future?
Structure of subjective experience.
Yeah.
It's not about subjectivity. It's about the structure of it, which is neurological.
Yes. My question is,
the more we learn about neurology, the easier it is for us to design. NLP is a trail of techniques, many of which are completely out of date, like reframing. Reframing was a good technique at the time because in the state of California, they didn't allow you to do hypnosis at that time unless you were a licensed psychologist or a medical doctor or a dentist. And there was a lot of people that were hypnotists. And but if you were a marriage and family child counselor or these things, they made you sign a thing swearing you would never do hypnosis. So we packaged a technique about concentration and altered states that had everything that hypnosis has in it without using the word. And so we had 6 steps and you went through and you go in and ask yourself questions and notice whether your heart beat faster or you got a feeling. And it was this whole thing that took 45, 50 minutes where you can just really do a handshake interrupt and set up finger signals with somebody. And if you don't call it hypnosis, it would have been easier. That whole battle is over, at least in America, because we have something called freedom of speech. And the difference between, quote, hypnotic language and other language is not profoundly different. People are doing the same. They're hypnotizing each other all the time. They just don't know it. And, you know, parents do it, preachers do it, school teachers do it, everybody does it. So it's the study of unconscious communication. And to say that that what it is just a pile of techniques. It's a methodology that produced the techniques that's important. The methodology has to do with the structure of how neurology works. And that we keep in mind that theory is not important, modeling is. We have a model that everybody uses in science called the periodical chemical chart. It is not true. It tells you the weight of a neutron, a proton, and a number of electrons. Now, when they made that chart, Niels Bohr's won the Nobel Prize for it, I think. We still use it because it's a functional model. We know it's not true. There is no neutron. There is no such thing. But mathematically, it allows you to be able to design things like naugahyde and synthetic polymers and plastics and all kinds of things. It has a use, but it's just a way of talking about something to accomplish something important. And the fact that it's not about truth is, NLP is not true. It's not right or wrong. It's a way of accomplishing something. And what we concentrate on is the end user. So if somebody comes in and he's having trouble with his assembly line in a factory, we go in and find a way that our job is to make it so that that one part of the assembly line works as well as the rest of it. I did that once by going in and finding out that what that part of the assembly line was just too boring. So I taught them all a little dance step and a song so that they would be cheerful. I got that from watching Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best. And the way in which we ask questions, and whether it's a schizophrenic, when people come in and they bring me somebody and they go, my son is schizophrenic, I ask the psychiatrist, I go, what would have to be different for you to let him out of the mental hospital? What is it that he's not doing or is doing that other people don't do or do that would distinguish? What does he have to be able to know to be more in touch with reality so he can go out and get a job and live his life? And sometimes they hallucinate. I had a guy who hallucinated people coming off the TV. And, I had to teach him to control the hallucinations. I had him hallucinate a pencil so he could erase the hallucinations and therefore was able to function in the world. He wasn't the smartest candle on the cake, but, psychiatrists kept telling me it's a chemical problem. I had a guy once and they told me he had a nervous breakdown. And when I asked them, I said, what nerve broke? They looked at me and they go, well, it's not that there's an actual broken nerve. And I said, then why are we talking about this? What exactly is the guy doing and not doing that has to change so that I know how to get the result? And therefore you could design techniques that will make this human being into being functional, or in many cases, to excel above other people. When you work with athletes, they don't want to be average. They want to be better than the other athletes. I had a guy came that ran a hedge fund and he wanted to make better decisions more often because he was controlling billions of dollars. And that seems like a worthwhile thing to do, to find out when the decisions are working and when they're not working. And he dealt with more money than I would ever be able to conceive or keep track of. But he was good at it, but he wasn't good at it all the time. Sorting out the difference between good days and bad days. Our methodology is designed to follow not a philosophy, but pragmatism. How do we make this work better, faster, quicker? The reason I kept doing phobias faster and faster and faster is that I discovered human beings learn better when they learn quickly, and it's easier. It wasn't that I had a value on taking less than an hour. It wasn't that 20 minutes is better than an hour. It's that if I did it in less than 5, I got a better result than if I did it in 50. And to me, we're only interested in what works. We're not interested in why it works. Neurologists very often can explain to me how it works, but I'm only interested in the fact that it does. We build descriptions that get results, and we place a value on results. Psychology places a value on understanding and explaining. And I did a radio program once where they had 3 of us on the program. And I lived in Ireland at the time, and they found out I was there. So they said, you're an expert on phobias. And I said, no, I'm an expert on getting people over phobias. I'm not an expert in installing them, although I know how it's done. And there was another guy that ran support groups for people, and he would sort them out by the phobia. So all the snake people would meet and complain about being afraid of snakes, and the bug people would complain about bugs, and the height people would get together and complain about heights, and the public speaking people would get together. And there was a psychiatrist who thought it was his job to find out the origin of things. And the psychologist said to me, he said, do you think what I do is worthless? And I said, no, I just think it's harder than what I do. My job is to get the guy in an elevator riding up and down and not caring about it. Your job is to go on an archaeological dig to figure out how it started so that he can explain to himself why he has this problem. And that's a lot more difficult than what we do. The job of being a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst is way harder than being a neurolinguistic programmer. We just have to get the person to be able to function well. I have to get it so that couples spend more time during the day enjoying each other than they did before. That's a lot easier than explaining why they were got in fights in the first place. That's a very hard job. I don't want that job. And when people understand why they have problems, they have a tendency to do them more often. And that's just not my goal. My goal for everybody is to have a better time, to get more done quicker, faster, and to enjoy themselves. I know people are happier when they have a purpose for what they do. That, you know, I grew up in the 60s when people were dropping out for no reason and doing nothing for no reason. And it didn't make them happy. It made them miserable and made them dysfunctional. And they ended up relying and taking too much drugs until they came out of the fog a few years later and discovered that maybe that job wasn't such a bad job, or they could get a different job. That, you know, it's not dropping out. We need purpose, and we need to manifest on this planet and get stuff done. This planet needs a lot of work. I mean, I wrote the book Thinking on Purpose because I kept being confronted with massive stupidity. The world needs to be smarter. And, you know, every time I come up against and I keep noticing something, I keep trying to do something about it. And, you know, unfortunately, I'm not somebody who does change at the societal level. I try to take it one person at a time, and sometimes in groups of 100 or 200, but pretty much, you know, I'm just going to chip away at it until I have an effect. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
You bet. We got time for one more.
I tell you what, I'm going to ask you a question, Richard, because these Zooms go so fast, and, you know, I don't know about everybody else here, but I still want more. So what about, could you make a suggestion for when people leave this class and go home and go on with their lives? What would be an interesting thing to experiment with, or to look for, or to, I don't know, to do so that they can build their skill after this class? What would be a good...
Well, I would go back and read Richard Bandler's Guide to Transformations. It's the book that relates the most to what we're doing here, and the book Thinking on Purpose. And I would hone my skills in the meta model, especially if you've been trained by somebody other than a licensed certified trainer. That's the magic word on the certificates, by the way, for a trainer, is the word licensed. We licensed people to be able to use the material in my books. Anybody with a printer can call themselves a trainer. I am a trainer, but that doesn't mean they've had any training and that they actually know what they're talking about. It doesn't mean they don't either, because, you know, I've met people who have come and gone through our trainers training who had been doing training for 5 years and just didn't know better. And when they got there, they would look at what I was doing and they go, this is really different than what I was taught. You know, they weren't taught to use the meta model properly, and it's not their fault. It's not about blame. It's not about anything. It's about, if I'm going to do something, I want to learn from the best. When I wanted to learn hypnosis, I found Milton Erickson. When I wanted to learn about therapy, I found Virginia Satir. When I wanted to learn about physics, I went and found a guy named Matt Sands that had built nuclear reactors and understood how they worked. You know, I didn't go into some classroom and talk to a professor that had never done anything. When I ran a research and development company, my physicists were all there because they had actually accomplished something in their life. They'd done something that nobody else had done. That's the kind of thinking I was interested in. I didn't hire people because they had good resumes. I hired them because they had good patents. And, you know, they had solved a problem no one else could solve. And you put 10 of those people in the same room, they could pretty much solve any problem, especially if you add the meta model into the mix. And companies came to us and told us where they were stuck in research, and we would solve the problem typically in days, because I could sit the people around in a circle and we would take their problem and put it through other minds so that we got a fresh look at it. And there was a guy who knew everything about every material that had ever been created. And, you know, one guy would go, well, we could do this if there was such a thing as read, write, film. And this guy would go, well, in 1981, Plessy invented read, write, film. Nobody's ever used it for anything, but I'm sure they have something. And when we pulled together the resources of various people and aimed at just problem solving, instead of defending theories or defending, I mean, I went to one company once and brought them a machine that would have revolutionized their business. And they literally looked at me and they said, there was no future for optics in computers. And now every computerized device has got an optical system in it. And this is where all the people in advanced systems planning at the second largest computer company in the world. And their people looked at me and went, there was no future. I showed them the device. It worked right in front of their eyes. And they still went, well, you know, we'll do that with magnetic things. And it's not that magnetic things don't have problems. I mean, you move a magnet through, you know, through space, you get electricity. It's called a generator. So even when we shot space things up originally in the Apollo programs, we had a lot of trouble because when they would go through the magnetic fields of the Earth, they would have to start reloading computer data when they got up there. And, you know, I'm sorry, but your cell phones got more sophistication than the Apollo spacecrafts did. Those guys were incredibly courageous people to go up in that thing. I mean, to me, I went in a museum once and looked at those Apollo crafts and just shook my head and went, man, they would have never talked me into that. I'm glad there are people with a lot more courage than me. I'm the guy that wants to sit on the ground and look at the photographs that they took. I have a collection of photographs from the first moon landing that they took of the Earth. And I find those things fabulous. I'm not the guy that wanted to go do that. Everybody has different goals, but those people had a purpose, and no matter what came in front of them, they figured out how to do it. We should be approaching cancer like that. We should be approaching education like that. I mean, I wrote a book for education and it's barely used anywhere. It surprises me how little teachers want to learn how to teach kids. And, you know, it's all about how to teach young kids how to have the right strategies to do math and spelling. And you know, one of the leading authorities on education in the world read it and said, well, he said, the problem with this is it's all about academic stuff. It's not about people finding themselves and having the right emotions. And I thought, what a freaking idiot. What a freaking idiot. The most important thing is to acquire skills when you're young so that you have a good life ahead of you. I mean, if you send kids through school and they can't spell and they can't read and they can't write, you're not doing something correct. And we should be looking at the kids that are having trouble and figure out how to adjust so that they don't.
You know, this is Israel. Israel is fantastic at innovating stuff. So they're really coming up with amazing stuff. These guys, I guess, who we're talking to here,